Welcome back to Titus Tidbits. We are talking about Titus chapter 2, beginning in verse 11, going down to chapter 3, and in the first part there. I wanted to talk to you about what grace does today. Many times what you hear grace doing in today's world is grace is like whiteout, where you can kind of live however you want to live. And in the end, it doesn't matter because God will take this big bucket of grace and he'll dump it on you. And that'll be okay. But that is not how Titus describes grace. Titus in Titus 2, verse 11, he personifies grace. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people. That's Jesus. Jesus is God's ultimate display of his grace. He's been gracious throughout time, but it's his ultimate display of grace to send his son. And in that grace, what the grace teaches us in verse 12, or trains us toward, is to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, and rather to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in the present age. That is what grace does for us. Grace doesn't excuse us. Grace trains us and motivates us. I'm using the word grace a lot. It means undeserved gift. And since God has been so good to us, we want to live holy lives before him. That's the motivator there. But then secondly, in chapter 3, there is this justification by grace in verse 7. And he uses that to motivate us, and that we wouldn't act unbecoming or prideful or arrogant toward people of the world, but that we would serve them and be ready for any good work in verse 1 and 2, knowing that in verse 3, we have been foolish and we have been outside of the Lord. But the grace that justifies us now in Jesus motivates us to change the way that we treat people, the way that we love them, and the way that we also show grace and mercy toward others who don't deserve it, just as we haven't deserved it. And so I hope that that's helpful to you to look at the two different ways that Titus describes God's grace, that he trains us through it, and then he justifies us by it. I hope that that's been good for you today, and that encourages you to be more and more faithful to him who has called you by his excellent grace. Thank you so much.